It's a real privilege for me to be present on this occasion and get an opportunity to speak to Dr. Karan Singh. I will not venture to introduce Dr. Karan Singh because there is no one who does not know him, his contributions, his scholarship, and the type of stature and admiration that he enjoys throughout India and also abroad. The second half of the 20th century is very significant in several ways. This was a period of great changes. Democracy took roots in many countries, including India. If someone attempts to review what happened during the second half of the 20th century, particularly when all the newly independent countries needed leadership, they were to start afresh. Most of them were deprived. They were suffering from poverty, illiteracy, economic crunch, and things like this. So very astute leadership was necessary. I could not think of anyone else except Dr. Karan Singh who would be the best person to tell us how India managed with the leadership it got during those 5 decades after the Constitution was implemented. We are proud of many achievements. We have several deficiencies also, and these can be treated as the challenges ahead. So, Professor Dr. Karan Singh will now tell us how the Indian leadership began after independence, how it carried out, how it envisioned the future of India, and to what extent it succeeded. I would like him to focus only on the second half of the 20th century, say up to the time of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Roughly that is the area that you would like, sir, you to tell us, because this will, your state will become historic and will certainly attract the attention of so many other people. And that is why we thought we shall give you the trouble of spending your time, and I'm really grateful that you have agreed to it.
Thank you, Professor Rajput, for your generous remarks. It is always a pleasure to meet educationists, and you and I have been in touch for more than half a century now. So, I think the first thing we must realize is that Mahatma Gandhi, who was the unchallenged leader of the freedom movement, gathered around him a set of outstanding individuals. Many great leaders don't have great people around them because they are so obsessed with their own greatness that they don't want anybody else around. But Mahatma Gandhi was the reverse. He chose very carefully a set of outstanding, and just to name a few: Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Babu Jindal Prasad, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, or C. Rajagopalachari. These were the sort of people whom he had chosen to be leaders with him. So when he disappeared from the scene, it was these people who took over. We were fortunate at that time to have such leaders. Now, it is often forgotten, Professor Rajput, that along with independence came partition. So, whereas on the one hand we are very proud and we celebrate our independence, we must remember the vast sacrifices made. Lakhs of people, millions of people were uprooted from their homes. Lakhs of people lost their lives in the partition of Punjab and Bengal. So it was not as if we got it non-violently against the British, certainly, and that was Gandhiji's unique achievement. But there was a lot of violence between ourselves. So when we became independent, the situation was, Delhi, where we are now seated, it was a vast refugee center. People were streaming in by the lakhs. Some corpses were coming in, trains full of corpses, and it was a terrible situation. And at that time, had it not been for two people particularly, the Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and the Deputy Prime Minister and Home Minister Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Had they not been there to steer the ship of state, we could have well fractured. You remember Winston Churchill had predicted that when we go, India is going to break up into 20 pieces. And in fact, that could well have happened had it not been for these two great leaders. Now, Jawaharlal ji was the charismatic leader of the youth at that time. My generation grew up reading his books, his Discovery of India, his autobiography. That was the one that enthused us. And I personally had a very long association with him. The Oxford University, in fact, has published two volumes. This is my correspondence with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, 49 to 64. He was my mentor, and of course I was in the state and he was in the center. I didn't work directly with him, but I was interacting with him constantly and writing to him, and he was writing back. So he was really the charismatic person who inspired us. And Sardar, of course, was also very great. His integration of India is something that is remarkable. The peaceful integration of the feudal states into a democracy has never happened anywhere in the world before. It was not one state. There were literally hundreds of princely states. How each one had to be integrated, each ruler had to be spoken to, that is the great task of Sardar Patel. People don't realize the accession was not a big deal. Most rulers acceded on their own, except for three. And those three all resulted in war. Junagadh, police had to move in. Hyderabad, there was a full-fledged war. And J&K, to this day, we still have problems. Apart from these three, all the other states, they signed the same instrument of accession that my father did. But then they were integrated. That was Sardar's role, integrating those states. J&K was not integrated until this Article 370 was removed 6 years ago. Jawaharlal Nehru was there. He was a, as you know, intellectual. He was an author. He wrote beautifully. He spoke beautifully. He was writing letters to chief ministers every fortnight. They are published separately, the fortnightly letters. And all the things that we have begun, education institutions, IITs, IIMs, our nuclear program, all of those began in Jawaharlal Nehru's time. So if you want to go chronologically, the first, he and Narendra Modi are the only two prime ministers who have had 3 terms successively. And Panditji had those 3 terms. And then, of course, there was Lal Bahadur Shastri, came after him. Also a very, very fine person. Totally different, of course, you know. Lal Bahadur Ji's style was quite different from Jawaharlal Ji's. And then I was in touch with him also. In fact, when my father passed away in 1961, Lal Bahadur Ji was the Home Minister. He was the one I interacted with during that succession. So then, of course, there was Indira Gandhi again. Indira Gandhi, this is the second volume, my correspondence with Indira Gandhi. These 2 companion volumes will tell you a lot about what I thought at that time and what they thought. Now, education was always something very, very prominent in everybody's mind. There was various views were expressed, institutions were set up. You have been involved in many of those institutions, the NCERT and so on. Universities began growing up. My association has been with universities, but as a chancellor rather than as a student. I was a student in J&K and also chancellor, university. I was a student in Delhi University. I was a chancellor of Banaras Hindu University for 3 terms, 15 years. And I was also chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University. So I've had a lot of interaction with university people. And I'm glad to see that the transition that has been taking place technologically and politically has reflected itself to some extent in our educational tradition. Now, with regard to the goals of education, if I may digress, if you like, I was a member of the UNESCO International Commission for Education in the 21st century. There were 15 people chosen from around the world on their individual capacity, not representing any country. And we came up in that thing with a very interesting, the report itself was called Learning the Treasure Within. Evocative phrase. In other words, it's not only from without, it's a treasure within.
Sir, this title, when I saw the report, it was released in Geneva
Yes.
on 2nd October 1996.
Yes.
And when I saw it for the first time, I immediately thought of you and Swami Vivekananda, because this is what Swamiji had said, manifestation of treasure already.
Yes. Treasures are learning the treasure within. And we identified 4 pillars of learning. You find that very interesting, educationist way. The first pillar was learning to know. In other words, learning to learn. You must know Gyan Yoga first. You must understand. Now, learning to know involves educational methodologies, how the teacher teaches, what language they use, what technology is used. There's a whole, but learning to know is and I think learning to know also involves learning to ask questions. In India, we are too unquestionable. You know, we don't ask questions. You won't learn unless you ask questions. What are the Upanishads? Upanishads are questions and answers. What is Bhagavad Gita? Questions and answers. So always from questions and answers to wisdom emerges. So learning to know is the first pillar of education. That involves educational methodologies, procedures, classrooms, syllabus, and that whole lot. The second pillar we identified was learning to do. If the first was the Jnana Yoga, the second was the Karma Yoga. What do you do if you learn and just sit around unemployed? What is the use of that learning? In fact, your learning tends to decrease over time. So learning to do is the whole theory of skilling, which has now come into fashion. Skilling, learning to teach people, children, what they should do in their lives, where they can grow, where they can progress, and providing opportunities for young people to do. Because unemployment is one of our biggest problems today. Because they have nothing to do. Padh to liya unhone, they have got their degrees, but they're just hanging around. Now, therefore, along with learning to know, learning to do is equally important. And governments have not only to look into the curricula from learning to know, but they have to also look into the way skilling can be done, and young people can be taught, and unemployment can be absorbed. That has been a great problem for us. That's the second pillar. The third pillar is also tremendously important nowadays. It's learning to live together. Social cohesion, Mr. Rajput, you often talk about social cohesion. In a country like India, there's multiple languages, multiple racial types, multiple cultures. Each state has its own food, its own dance, its own dress, its own language. So it's an extraordinary country. If you take the whole of Europe together from all the way across, then perhaps you begin to, as one country, you will begin to understand what India is. It is twice the size of that whole of Europe, 3 times as many people. So a country like this, unless you learn to live together, will fracture. That is where it is so important that things like language became a flashpoint. You remember, even in Panditji's time, language became a flashpoint in the south. There were language riots. The question of language, the question of genuine federalism. consulting with the states, not imposing everything from the center. That's not going to work in a country like India. In a country like India, it's a federal country. Our constitution says it is a union of states. And that means states must be given their importance. You cannot ride roughshod over the states. If you do, you will bhogo the result. It won't be good. So learning to live together, particularly after the partition, do not forget that the partition took place on the basis of religion. That is a fact. We can't deny that. But it is extraordinary that whereas the breakaway Pakistan country adopted an Islamic constitution, there was no knee-jerk reaction from, we could have also said, 80% Hindus, we will have a Hindu constitution. No. We said no, we will have a secular constitution. We will have a constitution in which every individual has the right to vote whether they're educated or not educated. It was a tremendous step that we took. It is unprecedented in the world. So learning to live together after the trauma of partition, obviously there was tension between the Muslims and the Hindus. Gradually we had to get over those tensions. We can't exacerbate those tensions. If you try to revive those tensions today, again we will face disaster. So, Ano Bhadra Kritavo Yantu Vishwataha. Rigved says, let noble thoughts come to us from every side. And the Veda also says, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one, the wise called it by many names. Because I don't know whether you know, I've anchored for Sansad TV a whole series called Ekam Sat, in which I presented the leaders from every religion in India, big or small, doesn't matter. I think it was the first time that somebody took the trouble to really present people from every religion. Baha'is we presented, the Parsis we presented, all the major religions, of course, we presented. This is the third pillar, is learning to live together, social cohesion. And the fourth pillar, if you like, is the most interesting, learning to be. Now, learning to be, what does that mean? Someone will say, what does it mean, learning to be? Learning to be, that is again a very Indian concept. What are we? What are we inside? Are we really acting like human beings? Are we controlling our animal propensities? Are we trying to help humanity, or are we going to destroy humanity? Learning to be an integrated human being. Tasya pragya pratishtitaha. That is what we want. We want people with balanced consciousness. They alone can build a balanced world. The world is out of joint now. Today, there are wars everywhere, Sir Rajput. Astounding our generation. There are wars now in Europe. There are wars in Asia. There are wars in Africa. There are wars in Latin America. There are wars everywhere. We thought we were over the period of wars. We seem to be going into a new period of wars. So therefore, learning to be means learning to develop the maximum of our inner capacities. And we have a lot of capacities, known and unknown, developed and undeveloped, but learning to be. So I think, if I may say, these four pillars of learning are extremely important. And that is my message to the teachers. Please study this. Please try and develop in all the four pillars. Try and develop as good teachers so that children learn to know. Try to develop as good instructors so that you teach the children to do something. Try and develop in such a way that you become centers of cohesion. And try and develop your own inner capacities to the maximum.
You have seen the education sector also very closely. You have also been the Minister for Education.
For a short while.
Even otherwise, you've been associated with the development of institutes, their creation, establishment, so many things. Did we really succeed in spreading the meaning and message of secularism to the younger generations? The term secular is interpreted in different way. And when this term secular was brought in the preamble, Dr. L.M. Singhvi told me that Srimati Indira Gandhi asked him what should be the Hindi translation. Should it be Dharma Nirpekshta or Panth Nirpekshta? And Dr. Singhvi said that he had suggested Panth Nirpekshta, and that there is a tremendous difference between Dharma Nirpekshta and Panth
Absolutely.
Nirpekshta. That is normally misunderstood. So, how can it really be understood properly, and how education can run it?
See, you're quite right. Secularism has many interpretations. What happened was that in early years, secularism in some ways tended to become anti-Hindu. One of the reasons was that a lot of the great historians and writers were leftists. They were either communists or leftists. And they were very outstanding intellectuals, mind you. Irfan Habib and Robert Athaw, they're great writers. But their whole trend was to somehow play down the great Hindu civilizations. So all we were taught was all these Mughals and all the time that we were under foreign Mughal rule and slave dynasties and so on, so on, so on. So what about our great empires? What about the Chola Empire? Or what about the empire that the Kashmiri kings built? Avanti Varman's empire, Lalitaditya's empire, and the Assam empire. So those were, so secularism became distorted between the left and the sort of anti. So it began to be looked upon as a term that was anti-Hindu. Now, real secularism, at least the way I look upon it, cannot be anti anything, because secularism means getting them all together. I must let me talk for a while about the interfaith movement, with which I have been involved for half a century. The interfaith movement, Dr. began in 1893 in Chicago, with the first Parliament of the World's Religions, where Swami Vivekananda made such a tremendous impact. Although he was not invited, it was fortuitous, maybe a divine intervention, if you like, that he turned up there. He made a tremendous impact. From then on, after 100 years then, the Chicago people woke up and said, we had this in 1893, let's have it again in 1993. So 1993 they started this, again restarted the Parliament of World Religions, and from then on, every 3 years, every 4 years, parliaments have been held around the world. So the interfaith movement is a movement designed to bring people of different faiths together in a harmonious dialogue. It's not a Shastrarth. Let's be very clear. Shastrarth wants to prove one is better than the other. Advaita is better than Dvaita, Dvaita is better than Advaita. But this is not a Shastrarth. It is harmonious dialogue. For example, if you were to talk about religions and the environment, you'll get common ground. Religion and children, you'll get common ground. If you choose those areas where everybody is interested, don't get into theology. Because if you argue, half the world believes in rebirth and the other half does not believe in rebirth. You can argue until you are reborn, you'll come to no conclusion. So never touch theology. But as far as sociology is concerned, the position of women, the position of children, the importance of the environment. Bhavani Vasundhara. Why do we worship the earth? हम तो पूजा करते हैं. Before anything is done, धरती पूजा होती है कि हम आपको कष्ट दे रहे हैं, इसकी क्षमा करें हमें. So earth is a living mechanism for us. It's not just a dead planet. This is the earth that has nurtured our consciousness up from the slime of the primeval ocean 2 billion years ago to where we are today. And look at the way we have despoiled this. In the last 100 years, we polluted the land, we polluted the water, we polluted the air, we polluted the oceans. तभी तो ये हो रहा है सारा, all these things that you are seeing, these strange weather conditions, the floods, the landslides, the All of this is nature hitting back. You cannot despoil or insult nature and not expect it to hit back. Therefore, we must revive reverence for the earth. You may not look upon it as a divine entity. We do. Other religions may not. But it is our earth. Every religion was born on this earth. No religion has been born on the moon or in the stars. इसी धरती पे तो उभरे हैं सारे. Therefore, we have got to revere the earth, and that is and the interfaith movement is linking very strongly with the environmental movement. That movement started for itself in 1972 in Stockholm, and I was on that delegation, or Indira Gandhi delegation. So I was there in the birth of the environmental movement, and that has grown a great deal. But we are still behind our goals that we had set, and if we keep falling behind, then we are going to be doomed. Because if the earth is doomed, we are doomed also. How many people will Musk send up to the moon? Wahan jaake raho. So therefore, these are very exciting times, and young people have got to learn about these issues. Young people are the ones who are going to inherit this earth. हमने और आपने सब जो करना था कर लिया, अच्छा किया बुरा किया, लेकिन जो बच्चे हैं जिन्होंने धरती को आगे काम करना है, उनको तो कुछ पता चले. Let them at least know about these issues. Nobody is interested.
Sir, there is so much in the scriptures that we have in our culture. There is so much about the respect that Indian culture accords to the...
भूमि सूक्त, अथर्ववेद में भूमि सूक्त 72 उसके वर्सेस हैं.
But somehow, in the name of secularism, we have discarded these things in education. That is very unfortunate part. One of the suggestions that emerges is that basics of all religions must be made known to every child. Basics only. And they should know the commonalities. If they know the commonalities, they will also learn to respect differences. This can be one approach which might be helpful.
It is a difficult approach. You see, the Constitution forbids us from teaching religion.
Yes.
We can't teach religion. Now, the moment you start teaching the fundamentals of religion, question what are the fundamentals, who has chosen the fundamentals, what are the fundamentals of Islam, who is competent to choose the fundamentals. You know, it sounds a nice idea, but what I think is, it has problems. What I think is, children should be introduced to the interfaith movement. There is such a movement. There is an environmental movement. There is an interfaith movement. उसी से कुछ पता लगना शुरू हो जाएगा. We want to encourage children to learn about religions. We cannot teach them in government institutions, as the Constitution rightly says. But for one thing, private institutions can, and secondly, there are other institutions. For example, the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. Those sort of institutions can play a very major part. It's very important that young people grow up with a knowledge of the interfaith movement. What are the problems there? Of the ecological movement.
Religions are a reality. Can we ignore this diversity of religion?
No, you can't.
Therefore, we have to have some method of getting familiar with the commonality.
I agree with you entirely. That social cohesion is the work that must be done by civil society generally. And the universities or the educational institutions can help, not necessarily in the classroom, but if social, for example, I am involved with something called the Manav Rachana University. They have gone specifically out, Man Building University and Human Building University, and they do a lot of work outside of the university, in the slums, in the areas. For example, if some of our teachers were to go out into the slums in Delhi or in Gurgaon and do a little prachar there, that may be more important simply than doing it in the classroom.
Would you like to give us some idea who were the most impressive personalities as prime ministers and everybody listened to them? Because when I used to sit in the officers' gallery, I recall some of them when they stood up, everybody would listen.
First of all was of course Jawaharlal Nehru. जैसे आज मोदी जी छाए हुए हैं वैसे पंडित जी छाए हुए थे. You must understand that. Pandit ji was the main person. और जब भी वो आते थे, we used to fly down from Kashmir to listen to his reply to the Foreign Affairs address. So important was it. After that, there was Lal Bahadur Shastri, who was on a much more modest scale, also a very fine man. और वो युद्ध हो गया था उनके वक्त. शास्त्री जी, पंडित जी के वक्त तो 72 में युद्ध हो गया था. शास्त्री जी के वक्त 65 में युद्ध हो गया था. So that was the big element at that time. Then there's Indira Gandhi. Now, Indira Gandhi was there also for 15 years with a break. And I was in her cabinet for 10 years, from 67 to 77. So I saw her finest hour, which was the liberation of Bangladesh. That was the most, people now can't appreciate कि कितनी उसमें खुशी हमें हुई, जितनी अपनी आज़ादी में हुई करीब करीब उसके बराबर हुई जब बांग्लादेश फ्री हुआ. There was so much enthusiasm, and when she almost ran into the house and said, "Mr. Speaker, I have an announcement to make," the house fell deadly silent. Dhaka is now the capital of a free country, and the house exploded. वो क्षण मैं कभी भूल नहीं सकता हूँ. That was Indira Gandhi's finest hour. And then I'm afraid I also went through the darkest hour, the emergency. So I was there for both. मैंने दोनों देखे. Which shows कि आदमी चाहे कितना भी बड़ा हो, अगर बुरे दिन आते हैं या गलत कदम करते हैं तो डाउन भी हो सकते हैं. ये नहीं कि ऊपर ही रहेंगे. इंदिरा गांधी को जब डाउन हुई तो लोगों ने निकाल के फेंक दिया, और फिर जब जनता दल ने अपना आपस में तमाशा शुरू किया तो फिर से उनको ले आए. तो भारतवर्ष के लोग बड़े समझदार हैं. You see, we've got, I believe, that we have a collective wisdom in India, which expresses itself from time to time. Whenever the ship tilts too much on one side, countervailing forces come up. Then let me come to another Prime Minister later on, Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Now, Atal ji was a very, very interesting person. We had deep regard for each other, although I stood against him in an election in Lucknow, but we never had any ill will against each other. एक दूसरे की प्रशंसा ही करते रहे हम. मैंने यही कहा, सबसे बड़ा जो कहा, मैंने कहा ऐसा है कि अटल जी ब्राह्मण हैं, उन्होंने वचन दिया है कि उन्होंने कहा था अब 3 बार खड़ा होऊंगा. मैं नहीं चाहता हूँ कि वचन उनका टूट जाए. That is the way I put it. I mean, that is the softest way that I can put it. So anyhow, but quite apart from that, in Parliament, क्या बोलते थे साहब, वाह. उनकी हिंदी बोलने रुक रुक के बोलते. मोदी जी तो धारा प्रभाव बोलते हैं ना. अटल जी का स्टाइल बिल्कुल अलग था. वो एक सेंटेंस कह के रुक जाते थे. शायराना अंदाज था उनका. ये अटल जी वाकई बहुत बढ़िया आदमी थे. 5 साल रहे वो, 99 से लेकर 2004. अडवाणी जी आते, उन्होंने सोचा था वो जीतेंगे, हार गए.
Sir, whenever we talk of India's culture, other things, traditions, we refer to dialogical tradition. Why it has vanished from the political arena at this stage?
Over the years it is deteriorated. नहीं, डायलॉग तो अब भी होता है. अब तो होल ऑफ पार्लियामेंट इज डायलॉग, लेकिन कोई मजा नहीं है उस डायलॉग का, क्योंकि वो डायलॉग इज डन अंडर सच हार्श सर्कमस्टेंसेस. पॉलिटिक्स इज नथिंग बट डायलॉग. व्हाट इज पार्लियामेंट? 2 बोल रहे हैं. डायलॉग का होता है 2 लोग बोल रहे हैं, लेकिन बोलने का भी एक ढंग होता है, एक तरीका होता है, एक अंदाज होता है. तो अब धीरे धीरे उसको फिर से स्थापित करना चाहिए. मैं तो 40 वर्ष पार्लियामेंट में रहा. मैं इतना कह सकता हूँ कि मेरे मुंह से कभी कोई कटु शब्द नहीं निकला. हालांकि मेरा विरोध करते रहे. कौन? चंद्रशेखर और वो क्या मोहन धारिया, वो यंग टर्क्स जो थे, उन्होंने डट के विरोध किया. हमारे हमने कभी नहीं किया. हमने कहा भगवान ऐसे धीरे 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 सब ठीक होते रहे.
How can education contribute in achieving religious harmony. That is the need of the hour, and India needs it. We have to live, as you said, so learning to live together. One of the four pillars. Now, how do we proceed ahead? Because we have not yet learned fully how to live together.
That is a very great problem. And I've noticed recent years, tension is growing between the Muslim community and the non-Muslim community. There are various reasons for that into which I do not want to go. कि उसमें दोषारोपण की बात चलेगी, लेकिन that is not good. You see, every minority has its rights according to the constitution. But Muslims are not only a minority, they are a huge minority. अब कितने करोड़ हैं, 15 करोड़ हैं कि 17 करोड़, उसमें मैं नहीं जा रहा हूँ. इतनी बड़ी माइनॉरिटी को अगर आप तिरस्कृत ही करते जाएं या उनको कहते जाएं अरे आप यार ये तो टेररिस्ट हैं, ये तो पाकिस्तान, तो फिर कैसे चलेगा? वो फिर अपने पैर पे कुल्हाड़ी मार रहे हैं. और मैं तो मुस्लिम मेजॉरिटी स्टेट से आता हूँ भैया. प्रोफेसर साहब, मेरे राज्य में 100 साल हमारे परिवार ने राज्य किया, 80% लोग मुसलमान थे, लेकिन कभी तलखी नहीं थी. हम बचपन में जब जाते थे, अपने मंदिरों में जाते थे, उनके यहाँ भी हाज़िरी भरते थे. चिरार शरीफ जाते थे, मखदूम साहब जाते थे, बाबा ऋषि जाते थे, हमें कोई इम्तियाज़ कोई नहीं. दरबार साहब जाते थे, वहीं से तो हमारा परिवार उठा. इसलिए ये व्यवहार की भी बात होती है. और हमारी तो परंपरा बड़ी, जम्मू कश्मीर की तो बड़ी पुरानी है. अब वो भी आतंकवाद हो गए शुरू, वहाँ भी सारा तबाह हो गया. जो कश्मीरियत जिसे अटल जी ने कहा था, वो कश्मीरियत का अर्थ यही था कि एक जगह एक मस्जिद थी, ऊपर नमाज पढ़ रहे हैं, नीचे काली का मंदिर है, आरती हो रही है. एक्चुअली है वहाँ. वो सारे उन्होंने आतंकवादियों ने तबाह कर दी.
यही समस्या बढ़ी क्योंकि कुछ ही दशकों में जो अविश्वास बहुत बढ़ा,
बहुत बड़ा,
स्ट्रेस बढ़ा.
10-15 वर्ष में बहुत बढ़ी.
ऐसा कौन था जो अजमेर के जाता था और दरगाह नहीं जाता?
बताइए.
इतने सैकड़ों जगह हिंदुस्तान में है जहाँ दोनों ही लोग जाते हैं, दोनों तीनों धर्म उत्सव लोग जाते हैं. उसको दोबारा स्थापित करने के लिए मैं समझता हूँ शिक्षा की जिम्मेदारी तो
बड़ी जरूरी है. शिक्षा की जिम्मेदारी है, घर वालों की जिम्मेदारी है, जो माँ बाप की जिम्मेदारी है. भाषा अच्छी होनी चाहिए, माँ बाप की इज्जत होनी चाहिए, टीचर की इज्जत होनी चाहिए, आपस में मिलके जो भी टीम वर्क होना चाहिए, मिलके काम करो. सहना भवतु सहना भुनक्तु सह वीर्यम करवावहे तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु माँ विद्विषावहे. ये जो नफरत है, ये नहीं होनी चाहिए. भाई और बहनों, मुझे राजपूत ने कहा कि आप शिक्षकों को कोई अपना संदेश दीजिए. तो मैंने जो अभी बोला वो आशा है आप सुन रहे होंगे. संदेश यही है कि इस देश में एक हम आहंगी बने, एक अच्छा माहौल बने, नफरत न हो और हम इकट्ठा होकर आगे बढ़ें. जो विकसित भारत की बात हो रही है, जो मोदी जी कह रहे हैं, बात बहुत अच्छी है, लेकिन वो बात तब पूरी होगी जब हम सब मिलें. अगर हम आपस के बीच में हमारे ये ये खाई बढ़ती रही तो वो अच्छा नहीं है देश के लिए. तो आपकी जिम्मेदारी है, आप शिक्षक हैं, आप लोगों को समझाइए. खट खट में तो रे साईं बसत है, कटु वचन मत बोल रहे. पहले तो भाषा ठीक कीजिए लोगों की. जो भाषा चल रही है आजकल सोशल मीडिया पे और इस पे, तो वो भाषा बिल्कुल अस्वीकार करने योग्य है. और दूसरा ये है कि हर धर्म का अपना अपना महत्व होता है, हर धर्म का की अपनी सोच होती है. किसी धर्म का विरोध हमें नहीं करना चाहिए. कोई गलत काम कोई करे धर्म के नाम पे, उसका विरोध करना चाहिए. वो तो इस्लाम के नाम पे भी गलत कर सकते हैं, हिंदुइज्म के नाम पर भी गलत कर सकते हैं. अगर चलते रास्ते किसी को मार देंगे साहब ये गाय और गाय नहीं निकले, तो जो भी यानी धर्म के नाम पे या सिखों के नाम पे आतंकवाद करें, वो उनका विरोध करो. लेकिन इस्लाम का या सिख धर्म का या हिंदू धर्म का विरोध नहीं हो सकता, क्योंकि इन धर्मों में तो बहुत सारी चीज़ें छिपी हुई हैं. इनमें हर प्रकार की शक्ति है, हर प्रकार की विद्या है, और हमारी संस्कृति इतनी प्राचीन है, इतनी समृद्ध है। अगर आप वेदों पर चले जाइए, ऋग्वेद से एकम सत विप्रः बहुधा वदंती, सच्चाई एक है, उसे कहने के अलग अलग तरीके हैं। आपने शायद एक देखा, संसद टीवी के लिए मैंने एक कार्यक्रम एंकर किया था जिसका यही शीर्षक था, एकम सत। इसमें हर एक धर्म, जितने हमारे 10-12 धर्म हैं भारतवर्ष में, उनके लोगों को मैंने उपस्थित किया, उनके जो विशेषज्ञ हैं उन्होंने अपने धर्म की बात की। तो इसमें बहुत सारा काम आप लोग शिक्षक कर सकते हैं। कुछ क्लासरूम के अंदर कर सकते हैं, कुछ आप समाज में कर सकते हैं। जो शिक्षक हैं वो समाज में भी उनका महत्व है, केवल क्लासरूम के अंदर नहीं है। तो समाज में अगर वो अपने इस अच्छे विचार को बढ़ाएं तो बहुत बड़ी बात होगी। इसलिए मेरी आप सबको शुभकामनाएं हैं। मैंने कई लोगों से शिक्षा प्राप्त की है, और शिक्षा तो कभी समाप्त होती नहीं है। मैं अब 93 वर्ष का हूँ, तो मैं अभी सीख रहा हूँ, रोज़ कुछ ना कुछ नई बात सीखता हूँ। इसलिए ये शिक्षा कभी समाप्त नहीं होती। आप स्कूल कॉलेज करके कहते हैं अभी हमारी शिक्षा समाप्त तो नहीं हुई, आपकी अंतिम श्वास तक शिक्षा समाप्त नहीं होगी। इसलिए याद रखिए, शिक्षा जो है ये भगवान की देन है, ये हमारे समाज की देन है, हमारी संस्कृति की देन है। इसे सुरक्षित रखिए, इसे समृद्ध कीजिए, और इसे पूरे सारे विश्व में फैलाइए। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। नमस्कार।